You got a huge computer, some RAM sitting around, and a Newegg box. Sounds like a recipe for a good time. Where's the party? And since the theme of all of this is along the lines of what's old is new again, let's bring back a vintage intro while we're at it, if 2015 counts as vintage.
The wacky world of MultimediaJay.
I don't care how old I get. A Newegg box is still a sign that something fun's gonna happen. Where's the party? So yes, it's time for Tuxedo to take its place among the Pantheon again. It has been losing in terms of concentrated coolness to Monolith and the Dellasaurus for quite some time now, but I've actually thought up a good use for this system again. Now, if I can keep my train of thought in one piece, in my old age, whatever. So, what is it with the purple? That would be, of course, way over here, the plant light. And the salvia is actually doing pretty well, actually. You've got some offshoots that are sprouting up now. I think I'm confusing the plant. It's supposed to be a perennial that dies back to ground level in the winter and then comes back up in the spring. But there really isn't any winter when you've got one of these things under a plant light indoors. But anyways, that's where the purple's coming from. Now, let's take a look at Tuxedo. For those of you that are new to this channel, Tuxedo's case is actually from 2007. It was the original home for my Core 2 Duo system. And then when Core 2 Duo got a little too old and slow, we went to the Phenom 2 1090T in 2010. And then when the motherboard of the 1090T flaked out, I bought a new motherboard for it. And then I caught some AMD FX processors on sale, clearance of course, because they're from the pre-Ryzen era. So I upgraded to an FX 8320E, which has now served as basically me seeing how relevant I can keep the FX line of processors. This is pre-Ryzen AMD we're talking about here, when AMD was spinning its tires for years, and Intel actually got nice and complacent with their quad-core obsession before the Ryzen launched and gave them the swift kick in the ass they've needed for years. So Tuxedo loses on all fronts nowadays. It's not going to compete on speed, and it's not going to compete on efficiency. The Dellasaurus with its Sandy Bridge kicks this thing's ass in both arenas. But there are some strengths to this machine, and it's about time I played this machine's to its strengths, or however you want to put it. So let's pop the case on this thing and get to work. Okay, so when last we tinkered, we needed the power supply for the new Silver Bullet project and Midnaughts, because we found capacitor plague in that other power supply we had sitting around. So we've got a new power supply to put in, which is the descendant of that EVGA. And quite frankly, I want the better power supply in Tuxedo, because Tuxedo is technically the second in line with the computers, because the Dellasaurus is a retail conversion. Part of the charm of the Dellasaurus project is me seeing just how far the bone stock retail parts can go with no power added graphics cards before I finally upgrade the power supply and try to treat it like a more proper gaming rig. This, however, is a proper gaming rig. It just has a more dated, less efficient processor. So, we have the Noctua, I don't know, I think it was Redux it was called? Yeah, the Noctua Redux, aka Noctua fans that don't have wacko brown colors, running this Cooler Master Evo right here. So, we gotta get the RAM, we gotta put Tuxedo's original RAM back in here, which would be this stuff that the Dellasaurus has been using for a couple of years. So, I don't know what that's gonna mean in terms of where the fan goes if there's not enough room. But hey, take this thing off, clean it out, and see how the heatsink's doing. Of course, this is a newer application of thermal paste when I had more experience than on Monolith, so this thing, despite having a crappier processor, often gets better temperatures. And since I haven't hardly used the system because of the flaky RAM in the sockets, this Noctua fan is mint. Barely anything, barely any dust or anything. Of course, it helps if you don't hardly run the computer after installing it. The NFP12 Redux 1700 PWM. And pretty good fan. But I always have had problems with Linus Tech Tips fanboys who think that if you don't use Noctua, you're a moron. Like the fractal fans that I'm playing with here. Of course, this system actually, I hack job 140mm fan support in here via some modders funnels that'll take this 140 and blow it down to 120 to spit it out the back. Stop slapping the camera! One of the problems is, of course, this is flush, so we can't actually use the hinge on the door, so I had to detach the hinge. So when the door is on this thing, the only thing holding the door on is the 2 thumb screws in the usual spots. So, yeah, this thing was hack jobbed, and it danced and danced and danced. Now, one of the cool things about this case is because it's a descendant of the Chief Tech Dragon, there's actually quite a bit of, unfortunately, there's a little bit of rust these days, because this thing's been sitting around, but there's plenty of space for plenty of drives. So one of the things I'm thinking of doing is, instead of having a dedicated Linux system, just put a second SSD in here with Linux on it. And so I'll have the system to run Windows 10 with one SSD plugged in or whatever, or boot off of one SSD, maybe change the boot drive or something. Run Windows on one SSD for my basically seeing how long these old processors stay relevant, and also run Linux on another SSD. Because, of course, with all this drive space, we just bolt in another SSD and just change the boot order to change operating systems. A nice little luxury that I didn't have back in my college days when I first started playing around with these kinds of systems. Now, here is the 1866 DDR3 that hasn't been used in a while. I was originally using it to overclock on the last motherboard. Overclocking is available on this one, but I haven't been able to use it because the RAM holds me back, because it's the bone stock RAM from 2010. And because I've barely used this system, as it's had the show stolen from it by the Dellasaurus and Monolith over the last couple of years, much of what's in here is mint. Very, very mint. Basically no dust or anything. So, of course, I know this actually gets better temperatures than Monolith because it's a newer application of thermal paste, and I had more experience working with this cooler when I put this on than when I put everything on with Monolith in 2016. So because everything's mint and there's barely any dust, this is a Noctua NFP12 that I have here running this Cooler Master cooler and whatnot. And of course, this is a 140mm fan to keep the noise down. And one of the interesting things is this case had originally 120mm fan support in the back and on the side, but I just bolted this in and I took the hinge off the door, so you just use the thumb screws to keep it closed. But hey, 140mm fan, baby. So this thing has been sitting on the sidelines because the Dellasaurus kind of borrowed its RAM and Monolith stole its thunder all those years ago. But we've got a near mint motherboard with, just get the fleeky RAM out of there, near mint Noctua fan, and now we just got to put a power supply in to get this thing back in action. Let's get to work on that. There we go. This thing finally has its RAM back. We had to slide the fan up a little because of clearance issues, but as long as the cooling is blowing through the fins, it's actually an interesting setup because it's almost close enough to be like push-pull. So we blow through here, and then this thing's blowing out the back, so it's almost like push-pull with a little bit of space in the middle. So we'll have to see if it posts. This RAM actually was the original Crucial RAM from 2010 when I first built the 1090T. You know, it's just... yeah, before I found out about gaming RAM and heat spreaders and not hurting your fingers pressing the sticks down because... whoops. Because, hey, what do you know? They're actually flat. So, let's get this to click back in. And let's get the power supply out of the box and fire this thing up with what's now going to be a semi-modular power supply. Because at the same price point, the features improve after a year or two of a certain model of power supply being on the market. It may be a little blasphemous to some PC nerds out there to put the thing back on the case and just have the Newegg box on top of it, but hey, this computer can definitely do the honors. And at least I'm using the towel thing and stuff so I don't scratch the case anymore. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. That's a rather bizarre way of saying I've learned a few things over the years. Here it is, the EVGA 600BQ, a 1B away from being a barbecue. 600 watt bronze power supply, the descendant of the 600B that I put in here a while ago. Nowadays it's semi-modular, so hopefully less cable clutter and whatnot. 3, 2, 1, open sesame. Alright. manual, and of course we have the power cord. Of course, why would you sell a power supply without a power cord? And then we have other kinds of power cords for inside the system itself, because everything kind of snaps onto this beast right here, which I'm not going to try lifting with one hand because I want to break the thing. I just got it, for crying out loud. Let's check this out. So there we go, semi-modular, as in you plug in only the cables you need, but the main one with the main connector to the motherboard, I think that might be the processor. Yeah, VGA is separate on this one. Is hardwired in, so you've got one big cable to worry about and only as many other cables as you need. This is basically the 600, but newer, with this semi-modular design and stuff like that. There's this really nice attention to presentation on a lot of PC parts nowadays, because of course everybody and their mother's uncle has the RGB overloaded glass case thing to show off everything they have, so at some point I have to wonder if it becomes too much glitz and glimmer and not enough performance with what people consider a gaming PC these days. Or maybe I'm just a grumpy old guy just wishing for the good old days. Except in my case we're talking the 2000s, which weren't very good. Super hot processors, capacitor plague, loud fans because your system didn't have a lot of power save stuff. Yeah, computers doubling as space heaters, I don't miss it. Today is just so much better. And I'm not just saying that because I want to try and fit in with the cool kids despite being as old as I am, whatever. Okay, get this thing installed. Like I said, a focus on presentation. For accessories, they give you an EVGA cable tie and a set of matching screws, so you don't have to have silver screws protruding out the back of this work of art power supply here with the textured finish and all this other. Let's put this thing in. It's going to be interesting, though, because the texture on this is brand new, whereas the old case from 2007 has been pretty smoothed out over the years. Or maybe that's my cue to get some paint and repaint the case. That seems like too much hard work for something like that. Install it. Oh man, got that plugged in. That was actually one of the hardest power supplies to plug in that I've ever experienced, because it's a 20+4 connector, so to get everything to line up so it all goes in at the same time, especially when these two bits are actually made to snap together and go in as one plug, so to speak, a little bit on the tricky side, but we got it there. So let's hook up the auxiliary CPU power, hook up a boot drive, and see how much of this still works. So one last note before we push the button on everything, now that I've hooked everything up. I use most of the cables, but not the peripherals cable, which is for non-serial ATA stuff, because I don't have any that I want to use right now. So, one issue we do have to talk about with these so-called modular power supplies is that they're advertised as modular, but what they're really doing is reintroducing ribbon cables to your PC, as opposed to the braided stuff on the non-modular and whatnot. I realize modular power supplies are all the rage in terms of making everything look nice and clean, but these are ribbon cables. There's a lot of people out there that aren't going to be able to handle that unfortunate truth, or maybe I'm just old, I don't know, but those are ribbon cables. What else do you call them? They just have less connectors than the old 40 or 80 conductor ones of years gone by. So what happens when we push the button with this brand new power supply? That 140 spins up slowly. Everything fires up. We have a signal out to the monitor. Everything should be plugged in. We get a regular post, nice and stable. I also have the hard drive hooked back up, which is, I guess it's game storage. I'll have to see what was on it. And of course, this should boot off the SSD into Windows 10. But here we are. Nice and solid. I think we could probably stand the computer back up now. Nice and solid and nice and quiet with the Noctua there and everything. Ah, Windows was installing something. Yeah, I do believe I pulled the power supply in the middle of a Windows update, but look at how slow this 140mm is spinning though. It's controlled by the motherboard in this case, so of course both the fans are still spinning on the tired old 760. Kepler baby. But yeah, this thing runs so much better than it did with the old stock cooler and all the old stuff, even with the fan elevated so that it doesn't crash into the RAM. There is no cable management in these old cases, these old Chief Tech inspired cases, by the way, so there's another reason to not want them in today's day and age. The computing world, especially gaming PCs, has changed monumentally since these things were still in vogue. And before we stand this thing back up, the obligatory quiet clip. Nice. That's what years of iterating on this design did during the life cycle of Tuxedo as my main system. Okay, standing up now. This is the return of Tuxedo, and the return of an overclockable AMD system. It is absolutely a blank canvas for whatever other PC stuff we want to do with this thing. We didn't leave a CD in this thing, did we? No, I guess not. Nice little extra bag of parts where some of the old drives used to be. I should get some blanks to blank out those things as well. Ah, don't crash into stuff in the darn chair. Gigabyte, ultra durable. Considering the last board was a gigabyte and it flaked out, let's take better care of this one. The lights are still working. Alright, let's get this signed into Windows 10. Newegg! Yeah, this is from back when Newegg was actually 2 words, and they were selling case badges back then because all these computer cases at the time had case badge spots. And why is this thing taking forever to boot up? Okay, we're in. Wireless is hooked up in the front USB ports where it'll get better reception, and this thing is getting slammed-ish with updates. Well, we'll let this thing churn away and get itself caught up. And just like that, thanks to the magic of film, it is now the following afternoon, and Tuxedo looks like it's been greased. It sort of has, because I've just gone over it with some Goo Gone to get rid of glue residue from all the case badges, because I made the decision that I'm never going to bother with case badges on a system ever again. If a system comes with case badges, then yes, they can stay, but I don't want to add any, except maybe, what the processor is or something like that. Why? Because this is what happens when you go overboard. So my Xfi case badge from Tuxedo was starting to fade after a while, so I peeled it off and it left a gap. And I was like, well, let's move this EVGA one, over, and so that took the glue off, so I was like, I'll just super glue it on. I forgot how runny super glue is. The super glue ran down the whole case. Clean off the super glue. So I grabbed some isopropyl alcohol. Whoops, I forgot isopropyl alcohol can dissolve ink and paint. So it started to take the paint off the case. So I went over it with a Sharpie, and I needed Goo Gone to get the glue residue, and yeah, it was a mess. So the only real reason why I ever bothered with case badges for the processors, all those retail systems I've seen over the years that would have Intel inside or something. But anyway, since there is oil involved in Goo Gone, Tuxedo is going to be extra shiny until this dries up. I understand that there are some oils out there that are good for polishing metal and preventing oxidation, because of course oil and water don't mix. I don't think Goo Gone counts as part of that. There is citrus oil in there, but I've seen people polish computers with eucalyptus oil and stuff like that to make them shinier. I just don't want to take any more of the paint off than I already have. But yeah, system after system after system over the years would usually have right around here what processor it was, like Intel Inside Pentium 2 or Pentium 4 or whatever. So I was basically copying that for years, but I don't really think it's worth it anymore. I mean, with what OEM desktops have deteriorated to in today's market, is it really worth it to try and make your systems look more professional? So, I suppose if it's something like this where there's a dedicated spot for a case badge, something like these Newegg badges can go there. But anyways, we're downloading the latest version of Windows 10, then we're going to work out some issues with the games drive to get Tuxedo back to 100%. But from here on out, no more case badges. The SSD had to have a check disk done on it too, because SSDs can get pretty flaky when they're left powered off for a long period of time, more so than mechanical drives. Must be something that comes with the turf with this technology. Okay, I'm calling it here. So, one thing I do have to take a look at, I don't think that's paint that came off as much as it is lint from wiping this thing down with a paper towel. I should probably try and wipe that off and see if it looks better for longer. Either way, we have working Tuxedo again with a working games drive. We just got to bring it up to par with the other systems as well. I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do with these systems in terms of seeing which hardware setups remain relevant for whatever. But we'll talk about that some other time. The bottom line is, Tuxedo's back in action, and it has a reason for me to test things on it and whatnot. Even as old Clunky clunks away in the background because it's the middle of winter. Well, that helps keep the temps down anyways. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay, signing off. Thanks for stopping by.